I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Friday, guys. We made it to the weekend. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can find me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show. And you can find me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. Big announcement, guys, so that I don't forget. I know this Sunday is Easter Sunday, but I don't have plans this Easter Sunday. So actually we'll be live Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and Kim Iverson will be here. We have a lot to discuss. Kim has been venting quite a bit on Twitter, so we have some things to talk about. So looking forward to that, but welcome, guys. I hope you're ready to slide on into the weekend. I want to go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat. What's going on? Larez says, hi, yo, Sabrina, Eric, Corey, and Sabby fam. Congrats on 90K. Thank you so much. 100K in no time now. You sound like JB. Yeah, we'll see. The View. Always good for very incorrect takes. LOL, smash the like, y'all. Shout out to Hannah G says, second. Greetings, Red says, hello, Sabby. Happy Good Friday. Hello. What's going on? Dwayne says, doobie doo. Shout out to Mark. The Israelis need to be punished, including those people blocking the trucks. I hear ya. Shout out to, I clicked on you twice, Larez. What's going on, Lawrence? Shaka when the walls fell. Shout out to Jack says, hi, everyone. Greetings, Randy. Good evening, my dear Sabby comrades. Good evening, governor. I don't know why I did that. Shout out to Mastermind says, if a broken clock is right twice a day, Israel is a broken Mayan calendar. Ooh, I see what you did there. Shout out to Rick says, hey, y'all. What's going on? Eric T. Red says, hey, y'all right. Yo, here we go. Shout out to Roger said, love this beat. I like that beat too. Like, part of the thing, like when I became a part of Ritual Network is like, they do have like a catalog of songs that I'm allowed to use, which I think those songs are a lot better than the songs that are part of the YouTube audio library, because the songs that are a part of the YouTube audio library are just not good songs. I'm just being honest. Like they're not that good. So when I first heard that beat, I was like, this beat goes hard. Shout out to Be Easy said, let's get this started. Greetings, Sean says LFG. What is going on? Is this the same Sean? Oh, yeah, that is the same Sean. Sorry, there's more than one Sean. Shout out to Amanda says, yay, Sabby. Hi, everyone. Hello to you, Amanda. Shout out to New Sheep says, OMG, we're back again. Yes, we are. Did you miss me? Greetings, Gus says, hello, Sabby, and everyone watching. What's up, Qualb says, happy Easter. And I see the little bird popping out of the egg there. Do you guys have plans on Easter? Like, what do you guys typically do on Easter Sunday? You know, I feel like when I was a kid, like it was always like a thing. Like we had plans on Easter Sunday, but as I got older, you know, not as much anymore. Shout out to Tim says, going to a protest tomorrow for Palestine. I'm so sick of the U.S. complicity in this genocide. Genocide Joe will never get my vote. The DNC can miss me with the Trump BS. Love you, Sabs. That is great to hear, Tim. Love you too. Thank you so much for saying that. Shout out to Nas M says, happy Friday. Greetings, Zia says, good evening, everyone. Show Sabby some love. Hit that like button. Thank you very much. And shout out to Cloudness says, hey, or happy Good Friday, everyone. Sabby Sabs podcast today. Well said. Thank you so much. And shout out to Notori says, hey, y'all. Love, 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 love. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and give a shout out to Sabby patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. You're really keeping the lights on around here. There's a song by, do you guys remember this band called Counting Crows? Counting Crows had this song called Round Here. Was that them? Yeah. Yeah. The Mr. Jones and Me people. I wonder what happened to them. Anyway, shout out to Sabby patrons. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters. There's also Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really appreciate you. Or as my cousins would say, appreciate you. Appreciate you. All right, guys, what are we discussing tonight? Let's go ahead and bring up that thumbnail. I see some of you are familiar with the Counting Crows. I don't know how old everyone is in the chat, but one of those 90 bands that were really popular that just have kind of disappeared. Wonder what happened to a lot of those people. Was that Rick Round Here? Yep. Counting Crows. Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you for saying this, John. Yep. John said, hello, Sabby. I had to resubscribe. Tube kicked me out. Everyone make sure you're still subscribed, folks. Yeah. YouTube does that. YouTube does that. Thank you so much for letting the people know. Okay. Tonight, we are discussing Glenn Greenwald battles Governor Abbott. Oh my God, Glenn Greenwald really took him to task. We're going to get into that discussion about an executive order that Governor Abbott has just established in the state of Texas and how that could affect your right to, I guess I would say, I don't know if I want to say free speech, but censorship. Right? And how that affects like your space. We're also going to discuss, if you have not seen this, the View debate. That is actually Coleman Hughes and Sonny Hostin, and the look on Sonny's face. Yeah, we're going to get into that discussion, and hopefully you'll be able to get a different perspective on this show about that story, because I've watched multiple people already cover that, and I have a couple of receipts that I do want to show you, because I want to show you the overall big picture, because this really isn't about Coleman and Sonny. So I'm going to get into status quo and the narrative that's being pushed. We're also going to discuss the Biden protests, and I'm going to talk about how they're actually trying to attack your right to privacy as well when it comes to Palestine, how these two are connected. And last but not least, we are going to discuss Boston and the NYC crisis. I don't know if you've heard about this new report that has been released, but both of these cities, I think we do need to discuss what's happening here and what the future, excuse me, could look like. So I live in the Boston area. I know there's a lot of you that live in New York. I saw some of you when I came to visit recently. So I think you need to hear about that. So welcome. Let's get into it. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys, and start us off right. Let's go ahead and get started with the first story. So I just want to make this a little bit larger if I can. Yeah. We need to talk about this crisis that's happening in Boston and New York City and how this could actually start to spread to other cities as well. There was a recent report that was released that says many young people are ready to leave the Boston area. So let's start with Boston first, because I think this is something that I've been hinting towards for quite some time. And I've seen the change, having lived here over 11 years. I've seen the shift. Many young people are ready to leave the Boston area. Now, this is a new survey that was just released. I'll see if I'll make it a little bit bigger because I know you guys like the bigger text. Okay. With the region already grappling with workforce shortages, a quarter of young professionals living in Greater Boston intend to move somewhere else over the next 5 years as they navigate their career prospects and housing affordability. This is a new survey that was released. While the vast majority of people ages 20 to 30 said they're overall satisfied with their daily lives in Boston, an alarming 25% of individuals do not intend to stay in the region for the long haul, according to the survey from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce Foundation and its City Awake program for young professionals. So let me just dive in here for just a second and we'll come back to the article. This is something that former Mayor Marty Walsh was actually trying to warn people about when he became mayor of Boston, is that the younger populations, the younger professionals are choosing to leave this particular city. And there's a number of reasons, and we'll get into that. Marty Walsh did try to find ways to make the city a little bit more lively in reference to the nightlife. Now, don't get me wrong. You can come here and you can go to a good bar and you can party and have a great time. But when you compare it to other cities, even the nightlife here in Boston, it doesn't really, it's not as great as when you compare it to a city like New York or LA or Chicago. So that was something that he did try to change when he was mayor. I don't agree with all the decisions that he made when he was mayor, but he wanted to keep public transportation open longer. Our transit system here, I think the last call is 1 o'clock in the morning. That doesn't just affect the nightlife, but that also affects people that are working third shift, right? They have to rely on another source to get to work. So he did try to do these things. And then he received that offer from the Biden administration to work with his office in DC, and he left his mayor position. And the next thing you know, we ended up with Mayor Wu. So here we go. With this positive reflection of young residents and their experience in Greater Boston, it is imperative that the region's future and current workforce are able to stay in the region with the high quality of life and transformative policies and connections that amplify opportunities. With this survey, the Chamber Foundation is committed to using the data to understand and magnify the concerns of the region's young residents through essential convenings and the promotion of civic engagement and policy solutions. The survey probed 823 young adults in November and December who lived in Essex, Middlesex, Norfolk, Plymouth, and Suffolk counties. Let's dive in here. Results show that 27% of respondents were somewhat likely to stay. 38% reported they were very likely to stay. Another 10% were unsure or did not answer. Of the 25% of respondents who plan to leave. 16% were somewhat likely to do so, and 9% were very likely, the survey found. More than half of respondents have said they feel they have little to no power in state or federal government to make changes in the issues they care about, such as affordable housing, availability of quality jobs, and financial compensation and wages. I don't think this is unusual when you compare this to other big cities as well. I've told you multiple times the housing issue here in Boston is a problem. I have watched over the years these one-bedroom apartments. The rent just continues to increase. I remember when you could get a $900 one-bedroom apartment in the Alston neighborhood in Boston. You can't do that anymore. So the cost of rent has continued to increase. Meanwhile, people's salaries aren't necessarily increasing to keep up with that. So that's part of the problem. Availability of quality jobs. You know, what are these jobs that these kids are being offered? I told you recently that a study from the Higher Education Institute actually said a lot of the college graduates, more than half of them now, are underemployed. So that means that the jobs that they are getting, they're actually overqualified for. So the pay is obviously going to be less. And of course, it mentions financial compensation and wages. And we'll get to this piece here. This part is important. The survey found Black women, LGBTQ individuals are more likely to plan to leave Greater Boston. Women ages 28 to 30, people who identify as Asian American and Pacific Islander, and people in management occupations are more likely to stay in Boston. Now, why is that? Well, obviously, if you're in a management occupation, your salary is probably higher, so you can probably afford to pay high rent here, right? That's one thing. This piece here about Black women and LGBTQ individuals, it doesn't surprise me that Black women are more likely to leave the Boston area. I've heard complaints from people all over the years that have lived here that it can be very difficult, I think, to find your footing here in Boston. This city is different than other cities. When you compare it to New York, it's just the social life is different, the nightlife is different, and it is pretty much a college town. So I think what happens for a lot of people is they may come here for college, and then once they graduate, they realize, okay, I want something a little bit more lively, or I want to live in a place where I can build community. And I think what a lot of people have found is it's very difficult to build community in the greater Boston area. Part of that has to do with the fact that Boston tends to be a little bit more, or Bostonians tend to be a little bit more reserved. They are less likely to be friendly to people that are not from the neighborhood. I noticed that when I first moved here. This is not to say they're mean. They're just less likely to trust you. It takes longer to build friendships with people who grew up here. I'm just keeping it real about that one. Out of all the places I live, this has been, I think, one of the hardest places to kind of like crack into that bubble, you know, like of the locals. And part of that has to do with the fact is that a lot of people come here for college and they don't really want to stay here. Part of that is due to the weather. A lot of people will leave after they have 1 or 2 winters here and they're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going somewhere else that's warmer. That's part of the reason why a lot of people leave. We just don't have the best weather. New York is 3 hours from here, but New York is still warmer than Boston and they don't get as much snow that we do here. So that's a big part of it. I was surprised to see LGBTQ individuals are more likely to leave Boston because Massachusetts was the first state to legalize gay marriage. So I was actually kind of surprised by that. And from what I've understood from people that are a part of that community is that there is a community for the LGBTQ individuals in this area, and it tends to be a little bit more progressive than you will experience in other places that I've lived. So I was actually kind of surprised by that one. Survey respondents were asked about the importance of various factors guiding their decision to live in Boston. Cost of rent was important for 83% of respondents. So you guys see the housing issue. Job availability for 87%. Ability to buy a home for 78%. Efficient public transportation / mobility, 72%. proximity to family, 68%, and affordability and availability of childcare, 60%. All in all, it basically comes down to the cost of living, right? So we talked about housing, we talked about the jobs. Obviously, it's difficult to buy a home here. Houses are very expensive in Boston. I don't know if you guys, not even just in Boston, but even greater Boston, housing, it's every year you have to move further and further out to try to find a house that you can afford. It's ridiculous. There's a house for sale down the street from me. It's a Cape Cod, right? Okay. I haven't lived in this house that long, so just keep that in mind. They're selling that house for $750,000. It's a Cape Cod. It has 3 bedrooms. A Cape Codder house here, it's a smaller home. So it's ridiculous. That's right, Mastermind Hour. The rent is too damn high. You're right. Like, this is a big problem. The other piece here is public transportation. Anyone that you have talked to or that lives in the Boston area will tell you our public transportation system is a mess. Yes, it was the first one in the country, but it's not efficient. The New York public transportation system is way more efficient. It runs 24 hours. In Boston, that is not the case. I can't tell you how many times they shut down an entire line, whether it's usually the green line. The red line has its problems as well, too. But it's not efficient, and it doesn't go to some of the areas where people can afford to live. So then you got to have a car. So there's a lot to go here. Childcare is very expensive, but a lot of these younger people are not having children anyway. So that's probably why that's one of the more that item is lower on the list. But listen to this part here. The survey also found a potential relationship between people who are dissatisfied with Boston and want to leave, and how difficult they find transportation to be on a daily basis. That could point to racial disparities, the survey said, since young people of color ride the T and the bus at higher rates than their counterparts. Also mainly college students too. In the workplace, young adults reported high satisfaction levels with coworkers, but only 55% said they are satisfied with their pay. Only half said they were satisfied by opportunities or promotions at work. This is also why a lot of young professionals are more likely to bounce around. This is part of the reason why, because they're not getting promotions. So in order to get a decent increase, they have to go to another company. Listen to this part here. This is the one I think those of us that are in the Boston area, I think we could do a better job at this. In other potential explanations driving decisions about moving, 22% of young adults said they also found it difficult to build community relationships in Boston. That is one of the reasons why a lot of people that I've met that have moved here and they left 1 year later is because of that reason. Even those who could afford to live here, they said it's very hard to build community here. And it is. It is. I'm telling you, if you lived in any of those neighborhoods, especially some of the ones that are a little bit older, like Dorchester is an older neighborhood in Boston. People have been there for like generations. And like I said, they're not actually very welcoming to new people, right? So that's something to think about. I think we could do better with that, guys. I really think that we could. Jinho said Boston is a parochial city divided along town and gown class lines. Graduates are expected to live near university campuses. Southie perpetuates this trope from my years at Harvard. Very good point there, Jinho. And what's up, Jinho? I'm assuming you don't live here anymore. A lot of people leave. They come here. They may be excited when they first get here, but then they leave. Most of the people that I met, I would say the first 5 years I lived here, no longer live here. We can work on this, guys. I think we can improve that. And then it also says, the survey said, more entertainment options. So that's another one too. We don't have the most robust nightlife. I'm just keeping it real. They could do a better job. Now we're going to go to New York City, because New York is also having this issue. I don't know if you guys knew about this, but check this out. New York City's population shrinks by 78,000. According to census data. Let's get into this. Now, this was reported this month. It says New York City's population declined again last year, according to new census estimates. But city officials said that those figures did not fully account for the growing number of migrants, which would have resulted in a minimal drop being reported. The city lost nearly 78,000 residents in 2023, shrinking its population from 8.26 million people, according to the estimates which were released on Thursday. In 2022, it lost more than 126,000 residents. So think about this, guys. Even after the height of the pandemic, which was 2020, people were still leaving New York City. And people left Boston too during 2020. But this trend is continuing. From April 20th to July 2023, the city lost almost 550,000 residents, or more than 6% of its population. This is wild, son. Whew. And then they're talking about the population loss isn't accounting for migrants that have come to the city. But I don't think they would have included them in the census anyway. But this part right here, it's very true that lots of well-off people left high-income areas temporarily, and many of them have come back. But it's the struggling people that leave for good. 4 out of 5 boroughs continued to see population declines in 2023. The Bronx, the city's poorest borough, shrank the most, by nearly 1.9%, losing more than 25,000 residents. That's according to analysis by Social Explorer. Brooklyn lost more than 28,000. Queens lost more than 26,000. Man. So I will say this. I was just in New York recently, and in Manhattan, you do see a difference in the population. When I lived in New York, I remember the streets being crowded, like flooded with people. But I was just in New York for my birthday earlier this month, and you do see that big difference, particularly in Manhattan. Now, if you go out to Brooklyn, I think more people are going out that way, right? You do see more people there. There's also more people out in Queens, but you can definitely notice the difference. I think for any of us that have been around that way. For the second straight year, Manhattan, the richest borough, was the only one to grow, however, slightly. It gained nearly 3,000 residents in 2023 after adding more than 16,000 residents the year before. Still, Manhattan's population, just under 1.6 million residents, was almost 97,000 less than it was in 2020. The city's decrease represented about 3/4 of New York State's overall population decline of nearly 102,000 in 2023. Upstate New York lost more than 15,000 residents. So it's happening there as well. What does this all really mean in the grand scheme of things? This brings us into this concept of shrinking cities. And this is happening. And I think we need to look at where this is going to take us going forward in the future. People are leaving the cities. Part of this has to do with the cost of living increase, but another part of it has to do with the option for remote work. You know, when the pandemic happened, some of the companies actually gave employees the opportunity to work remotely indefinitely, not just during the pandemic. So some of those people said, well, why am I spending all this money to live in the city so I'm close to my job? If I can work remotely, I can just go live somewhere else. And that's what some people have done, not just New York, not just Boston, but also cities like San Francisco. I want to show you a clip here because I want you to remember what happened to Detroit. Detroit was once a thriving city. Lots of jobs. A lot of people moved to the Motor City. Remember this? Hearing about the history of it? There were so many jobs available in Detroit, factories, etc. But something happened to Detroit. And the more people leave these cities, we could be looking at other future Detroits. Not to say this is going to happen 5-10 years from now, but are we already heading there? Check out this clip here, the big problem behind shrinking cities.
This is Detroit, a previously wealthy city that has now become the poster child for the places that economic prosperity has left behind. The story of Detroit's decline from an economic powerhouse to a city where roughly 35% of its residents live below the poverty line is so well documented that we'll receive very little value from rehashing it here. To oversimplify a ridiculously complex story, Detroit used to have one of the strongest auto manufacturing industries in the world. Competition from foreign manufacturing plants suddenly made Detroit an unattractive destination for building cars. As jobs in the car manufacturing industry became scarce, Detroit was unable to pivot to higher value industries that could sustain its economy. And when the jobs left, the people that could leave Detroit did. Detroit's population today is about 1/3 of its population at its peak. But Detroit isn't the only city that has had a hard time attracting new residents. In fact, scientists estimate that 25% of cities across the world saw their populations decline between 2013 and 2018. They also predict that the number of shrinking cities will grow to roughly 37% of all cities between 2018 and 2050. The people with the means to leave will always leave. However, the people who are forced to stay will find themselves in a city that offers poor public services, few job opportunities, and the social problems that come with them.
That's the part that I'm the most concerned about, ladies and gentlemen. This part right here. Oops, I'm trying to get it just right there. Poor public services and few job opportunities and social, right? Because the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, the more people leave these cities, the companies are less likely to stay as well. That's what happened to Detroit. When people left Detroit, the companies started to leave. So when the jobs leave, what happens? Let's continue a little bit more
and the
here.
Social problems that come with them. To avoid becoming the next Detroit, cities across the globe are rushing to implement policies to attract new residents. These policies range from the boring, think tax breaks or fancy amenities, to the more creative. For instance, many rural areas in Japan are offering free homes to attract new residents. But maybe the push for new residents is misplaced. The fact is that not every city can be a growing city. The United Nations estimates that the global population will stabilise by 2100. If you live in New York, Toronto or San Francisco, then you might think that your city could never become a shrinking city. And you might be right. But of course, mid-20th century Detroiters believed that as well. So, what is the history of shrinking cities?
And we'll pause there. We're not going to get into the whole history about that tonight, but I do want to bring in the solution, or what he believes is the solution for this, or where we're actually going to be headed in the future. He mentioned San Francisco, but one thing I do want to add about San Francisco, from what I understand, people actually did start leaving San Francisco because the rent was so high, and some people were moving to places like Oakland. But now I've been told that Oakland is also expensive because so many people moved there. People have moved to places like San Jose. I heard San Jose is not affordable anymore now. So these are the anchor cities. This is what he believes is going to happen to these cities in the future.
Areas. This emphasises the importance of having an anchor city that supports these smaller regions. Not every shrinking city can neighbour a large metropolis, but with support from higher levels of government, shrinking cities can establish stronger economic ties with their closest economic juggernaut. In some ways, urban planning may take a page out of the Garden City we mentioned earlier, where smaller communities circle larger cities.
Pause. So he's talking about smaller cities circling larger cities. So like, what would be the anchor city for Boston, right? I guess someone may mention like Worcester. It's kind of further out. It's like an hour away. But I'm guessing like San Francisco, was Oakland that anchor city? Was San Jose that anchor city? What about New York City? Some people might say that Jersey City was that anchor city, but now Jersey City is expensive too. If this is the future of where we are headed, where people are leaving the big cities and they're going to the next city closest to it, which may be a little bit more affordable. If everyone continues to do that, then eventually those cities are going to become unaffordable as well. So this is not the solution. These things can be fixed though, but we need to start looking at this now and figuring out how we're going to handle this today. I would call on the tech companies, the Microsoft, the Google, the Facebook. Why do you only have your companies on the West Coast and the East Coast in these metropolitan areas? Why aren't you building other locations in rural America like Iowa, or in places like Indiana or in Kansas? You know why? These companies usually set up shop in the cities that have the colleges that are actually implementing these, giving out these degrees, those computer engineerings and, you know, computer programmer degrees. So they usually put locations next to those universities. This is why you have the Facebook and the Google and the Microsoft all right next to each other in Kenmore Square, right next to MIT. But that's going to have to change. Eventually, these companies need to be branching out. They need to go to rural America so that people will be inspired to stay in those towns and that they can have gainful employment. But what we're seeing right now is a lot of these companies only want to be concentrated on the East Coast and the West Coast, where it is very expensive to live. And that is going to continue to be a problem, because as long as most of the jobs are concentrated in the cities, what does that mean for the future of rural America? So it's not just about people leaving Boston and New York City. Just something I want us to think about. We have to think about these things, because I've lived in both. I've lived in rural areas and I've lived in, you know, the urban metropolitan areas. And I got to tell you, there are some towns in this country where like the only job or the only employer in town is Walmart or Amazon warehouse. Something's got to change there. What's that, Shirley? Shirley said Berkeley is no different. Skyrocketing rents, people leaving, going to Oregon. So you see how this just becomes a pattern? Interesting. Let me go to some of the comments here. William says, kudos to the person who provided me with a free membership for this month. You are welcome, William. Tia says, I remember when Deval Patrick begged students to stay in the city, promising more jobs. They never appeared. Right. Right. Thank you for the super chat, P. Smith. Eric, let me know how my Wi-Fi is. I think I'm freezing a little bit. I did reboot it, but just let me know how that is. Counting Crows Infinity Center, Mansfield, 723. Oh, I guess they're still touring. Interesting. Thank you, Roger. RW will hasten high-speed internet infrastructure. Interesting. Eric, can you let me know let me know when you have that. Thank you for the super sticker, Frank. I guess I'm just a little fuzzy. Okay, thanks, Eric. Tia says, look at Fitchburg, Massachusetts. It's a ghost town. Yes, it is. Thank you, Kip Doctor. Detroit declined because the manufacturing went to Mexico, Canada, and China, thanks to NAFTA and free trade. There you go. Dwayne says California is also seeing a mass exodus. Yes, they are. A lot of people from California are moving to like Texas and Arizona. And there's a lot of people moving from Chicago to Nashville. I have a friend that lives right outside of Nashville. She was just telling me about this recently. Thank you for the super chat, Shalon. Saw Amali Yeshitela on Tucker Carlson. I'm not familiar with him or the Hurus at all. He was talking about how the DOJ has targeted him, and he talked about how government hates self-sufficient communities. It was interesting. Yeah, they do. I interviewed Amali Yeshitela on this channel twice. That's interesting. I know some people didn't hear about him until Tucker Carlson spoke to him. But Amali Yeshitela, even I want to say a year and a half ago, he actually appeared on Democracy Now! He was on Tara Reid's show twice. He was on Katie Halper's show. I think he was also on Glenn Greenwald's show. Yeah. But I'm glad his story is getting more attention. Thank you for the super chat. None of your business. 10-minute cities are being developed. We went from 15-minute to 10-minute cities, huh? Are they changing it now? Interesting. All right, guys, if you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. If you are new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. Thank you so much. All right, let's go on to our next story. We're going to talk about privacy issues in reference to pro-Palestinian posts. And this is actually going to lead us into the protest that happened at the Joe Biden fundraiser last night. I actually have video footage from inside the event now. So let's start with what happened to a Muslim American woman. This was recently. Things are getting crazy out there. And I want you to understand that this is all happening under the Biden administration. So when we talk about privacy, when we talk about fascism, I want you to know again that this is happening under Biden. This is not just a Trump issue. When people say fascism, they say it's just Trump. No, this is also happening under Joe Biden as well. Take a look at this video here. I'm so glad that she recorded this. Again, this is a Muslim American, and she was approached at her home by the FBI because of posts that she made on Facebook.
Can we just move in front of the house so the dogs don't go crazy?
Sure we can, yeah.
I need you to identify yourself and let me take imagery of your IDs.
I'm not going to show you my credentials on the phone.
So you said you were with the FBI?
That's correct.
And why won't you show me your credentials?
We did. I showed you my
I didn't take a look at them. I said, 1 second, I'll be right back. Are you going to show me your credentials or no?
Yeah, we did already. So, and we identified ourselves. So what we'd like to do...
I didn't look at your credentials. Again, I didn't verify them. I told you to wait, and I went inside.
Okay, that's correct. What we'd like to do is just have a conversation with you about some social media posts that you've made. Would you be willing to talk to us today about that?
No, I would not. I would like you to later talk on with my lawyer.
Okay.
Do you have identification?
So they came to this woman's house. All right. I mean, I don't know if these are actual FBI or not. I don't know. But I do know they're wearing plain clothes, but they've been known to do that before as well. But they came to her house. Let me continue.
Cards? No. No. I'll get back to you.
Okay. All right.
Do you mind having your attorney contact the FBI office in Oklahoma City?
What's the number? What are the names of the agents?
I'll Google it for you.
So you're refusing to identify yourselves.
No, we've already identified them.
Again, I did not take a look.
Okay, so the phone number for the FBI in Oklahoma City is 405-290-7770.
Okay.
If you can just call and give them a name, then we'll be able to get your contact with us and I'll be happy to support you.
And tell him that Facebook flagged me for posts.
Facebook gave us a couple screenshots of your accounts.
Okay. So we no longer live in a free country and we can't say what we want?
No, we totally do.
Let me pause here. So did you guys hear what she just said? She said that Facebook flagged her for post. So that's why they're at her house. And I want you to see this, not just because I want you to see how your privacy could be infringed upon, but also because I want you to understand how you can respond if this were to happen to you. You don't have to show them your ID. You don't have to let them in your house. This is a common mistake that some people make, even when law enforcement comes to your house and knocks on the door and says, "Can we come in?" You do not have to let them in. If they do not have a warrant, they don't have to come into your house.
That's why we're not here to arrest you or anything like that.
Well, you can't arrest me for freedom of speech. We live in America.
Correct.
Exactly. So it's kind of weird that you want to come talk to me about me exercising my freedom of speech.
We do this every day, all day long, talk to people.
Okay.
It's just...
Did you hear what he just said there? He said, we do this every day, all day long. Again, this is happening under Joe Biden's administration.
An effort to keep everybody safe, make sure that nobody has any ill will or bad intent or anything like that. And we've got no reason to believe necessarily that that's you, and that's why we just wanted to have a conversation.
So do you have a conversation with everybody on the neighborhood?
Do you have information of anybody else in the neighborhood?
I mean, all I've done is exercise my right as an American citizen on a public social media platform with my personal opinions. Correct? Okay. Most of the individuals, right, in America, especially older generation, right, have Facebook. Are you questioning all the citizens in America?
We certainly would if we had any sort of concerns.
Okay, so you have concerns about my personal opinions?
If you don't want to talk to us, then you can...
I'm definitely not going to have a talk with you.
Well, thank you for your time. time this morning, and feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, they're so-called FBI.
So the FBI has nothing else better to do than to harass people at their homes, to infringe upon your privacy. They have nothing else better to do. Shouldn't the FBI be out trying to find, I don't know, catch serial killers or something like that? But here they are harassing someone at their home because of social media posts. This is what your tax dollars actually goes towards.
This is Rolla Abdeljawad in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This is America.
Now, when we talk about areas where we all can agree, I think this is something where, regardless of your political ideology, I think most of us would not appreciate that happening to us. And second, why is Facebook giving out her information? Some people said they don't know for sure. They don't believe that those guys were FBI, that maybe they were posing or trying to scare her or whatever. Either way, this is wild and this is crazy. But that shouldn't happen to anyone. And now you understand why some people and more people are angry at Joe Biden and his administration, particularly when it comes to the Palestinian people. This idea, they're trying to push and force people to support Israel. They're trying to force us. Same situation that happened with Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens and the Daily Wire. You don't have to like these people. You don't have to even watch their content. But at the end of the day, what they did to Candace Owens, again, for not being overtly pro-Israel, this is a big red flag. And all of us need to wake up and pay attention to what is really happening here. Now, last night, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, and Obama were actually hosting a fundraiser in New York City. We talked about this a little last night. There were people protesting, not just inside the event, but also outside the event because of this very issue, because they are tired of what the Biden administration is doing. This genocide that's happening in Palestine, that's happening in Gaza, could be over just like that if the U.S. government would to stand up to Israel and stop giving them the weapons and stop funding them. We could end it just like that. This really does rest on the U.S. soldiers. And the other countries that are our allies would fall in line because they usually follow what we do. They usually go with our order, right? So take a look at this video here. This is from the People's Forum. It says, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton can't go anywhere without being reminded of the trail of blood they leave in their wake. Activists disrupted the program tonight at Radio City Music Hall. Listen to this. This is the first one. There are others.
There was an insurrection.
Shame on you, Joe Biden! Shame on you! Shame on you! You are funding genocide in Palestine, and no amount of full concern that you do will change the billions that you are doing! There's blood on your hands!
Talk about the innocent death of Palestinians. How dare you talk about the innocent death of Palestinians? Palestinians are dying right now because of your actions. Palestinians are dying right now because of your actions. Because of what you're doing. Because of the things that you're doing. What is on your
Shame. Stop brutalizing him. Stop brutalizing him.
That's one of the video clips. Apparently, one of the things that he did discuss, I guess, at that protest was, at the event, was the Palestinian people. And so he has some audacity. Now, even outside or actually, let me go to Diane Sayre. Yeah. Diane Sayre, she actually ran for office. I think she's running again. She was also at this event, and she also disrupted the event as well. Listen to this. So that's Diane Sayre right there. They're dragging her out.
It's not surprising that because...
Yeah, so they dragged Diane Sayre out of there. And then I want to show you what happened outside. Now, this is actually protesters confronting those that are attending the event. And I want you to look at the people attending the event. Again, these are people, these are donors. These are donors. So pay attention to watch their attitude. Look at this woman. She's literally, is she clutching her pearls? Hold up. So look at this woman here. She's got on her pearls. He's got on his suit. This guy's a complete clown, right? So he's trying to be funny about it. These are the people that are allowing this to continue, guys. The people with the money. All these people giving Joe Biden money. They don't care about these kids.
Genocide Joe has got to go.
These are the white moderates. These are the people that MLK was trying to warn you about. They're the ones that maintain the status quo. And nowadays, because it's very different, nowadays you have black ones doing this as well. Some that are paid to do it. The black faces in high places where they pretend to try to represent us, but they really don't. They're just there to do the bidding of Wall Street. These are the people that are, this is what's holding us back. See this? You see, this is why I continue to tell you that my hope actually lies with the younger generation. It lies with the Gen Z kids. It lies with them because they know the history. They're more resourceful. They will look up the information to see if what they are being told is actually true. And we're going to need that going forward. We are going to need that. And it's not everybody from the older generation, but typically, it's a lot of people from the older generation that keep the status quo in place. All you got to do is look at the polls to see that. You can look at the voting polls when people go to vote. What is the largest demographic that goes out to vote? It's the boomer generation, people over the age of 65 and up. That's what's keeping things the way that they are. But eventually, what we need 20 years from now? Because these things are going to have to change. These things are going to have to change. So my hope, I've said this before, my hope really lies with the younger generation.
not voting for Biden and Joy Trump. I hope you love Trump. You fucking murderous cunt. Fucking murderous cunt.
Who's getting raped right now?
Fucking die.
Who's getting raped on the fucking line? Children were dying while you were sitting in there comfortable. Yeah, I love you. You should be ashamed of yourself. Children are dying as we speak, and you think it's funny? There's no...
They don't care that those children are dying. Those aren't the children that they care about. See, I think a lot of people are waking up to this now.
What the fuck you supposing? You should know better. I'm not you think this is fucking funny. You have nothing to say now, huh? Genocide supporter! Genocide supporter! Shame on you! Genocide supporter! Shame on you!
You have fun with Trump. You have fun with Trump. It'll be the same for us.
So, yeah, those were some of the people that were actually entering that event. And what's interesting as well, Fox News was actually there. Of course, now they're going to take Fox News is like, yeah, this is our way to get more dirt on Joe Biden, right? But the thing is, don't get it twisted, because we all know Trump also has an alliance with Israel as well. So this is actually a bipartisan issue. It affects the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But Fox News was there and they said, this is our moment to gather some stuff about Joe Biden.
What are you here protesting about?
I hate old white men. I'm
And she said it to Fox News. That's the funny part. So this sign, I thought it was pretty cool. It said caution war criminals, because every single one of those men on that stage they're all war criminals.
Go! Genocide, go! Got to go! What are you here protesting about?
I hate old white men. I'm protesting American empire.
The American government is funding a genocide with our tax money.
I'm protesting the American government because I...
Why are you mad at Joe Biden?
Joe Biden is an old white man.
He's a clown.
I'm sorry. I love it. I love that one. We got to breathe. We got to hear one more time.
I'm protesting the American government because I...
Why are you mad at Joe Biden?
Joe Biden is an old white man.
He's a clown.
He's supporting Israel against Palestine. That's what we're angry about.
He's racist. He's ruining the country.
He's not listening to the American people.
That one was very powerful when she came back and said, that Joe Biden is racist, because that was coming from a Black woman. See that? I've been saying this before about Joe Biden. Other people say Donald Trump is racist. I'm like, Joe Biden is racist too. Come on now. There's a difference between overt and covert racism. You're talking about this man actually was friends with people like Byrd and Wallace, all these racist dudes, these segregationists. He co-wrote the crime bill and all this jazz. Get out of here. The same guy who sat up there and told Charlemagne the God that if you got to think about whether or not you're going to vote for me or Donald Trump, then you ain't Black. What? That was gold. I'm sorry. I think I interrupted this guy. Here we go.
American people.
No genocide, Joe. The whole damn system's got to go. Everyone's also mad with Obama and Clinton, are you?
Yeah, because Obama did drone strikes in the Middle East during his presidency.
What's your message to Joe Biden?
So you heard that, guys? I told you they are more resourceful. So Obama, your mask is off, at least with the younger voters. You see what they're saying? Yeah, Obama did drone strikes. Woo!
My message to Joe Biden is cease fire now. You should be ashamed of yourself. I don't believe you have an ounce of guilt in your body. And
if Joe Biden keeps it up, Are you going to vote for him?
No. I'm definitely not voting for him. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
What about Joe Biden? Does he have your vote?
No, he doesn't have my vote.
Who does?
This does.
Oh.
Okay.
She was wilding. You gotta love it, guys. I'm sorry, guys. But yeah, I mean, this is hopefully a wake up for the Biden administration. It's wild. Notori says, I love her. Yeah. And so, yeah, a lot of my hope is with the younger generation. I do feel like they are less afraid of the establishment. They're less afraid of the government. And I feel like they just don't buy into the BS, So I think that she was something else. I know. Samantha said, and it said prime time. I know. I feel you. Let's go to some of the comments here. But again, I told you fascism is happening under Joe Biden as well. So we cannot sit up here and just say, if you elect Trump, you're going to have a fascist in office. You see what's happening right now with Joe Biden. Thank you for the super chat, Shalom. Admittedly, I've been in the bubble of conservative media, started to branch out and realizing a lot of interesting points of view and people. Interesting. Well, welcome. Shout out to Helpful Harm. Look up Movement for Settlement of South Lebanon. Yeah, I believe we talked about that on here. Lamar says, and these fools still raised $25 million. W2E. Right. They raised $25 million. Why aren't those people, like I said, think about what we could do with that money in this country, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's public education, whether it's clinics, hospitals, housing for people. But no, people are taking that money and they're giving it to campaigns. Lance said they know the younger generation wants change. That's why they're building so many cop cities. Yes, I agree. The Oracle, the gatekeepers who will do anything to maintain their positioning in the power structure as puppets and protectors of the elite. Well said. Thank you so much for that. Man, that was a doozy. That was a something. Dwayne says, revolution now. I'm going to tell you something about the revolution. Revolution will not be televised. If a revolution happens, it won't be televised. It won't be on YouTube. They won't want people to know about it. I really do believe that. People will be out in these streets. All right. Okay. Let's move on to the Glenn Greenwald story. It's Glenn. Oh, man. So I saw this, I saw the tweet on Twitter of Governor Abbott, and Governor Abbott actually was tweeting about creating a space that is safe for Jewish students. Now, Governor Abbott, this is where the hypocrisy comes in. We've been talking about hypocrisy a lot the last couple of nights, but this is where the hypocrisy comes in, because typically it was the Republican Party or members of the Republican Party that said they didn't want to deal with this whole idea of safe spaces and wokeism, more so from the politicians, the Republican politicians, right? And Governor Abbott was one of those people. But now, all of a sudden, because it involves a certain segment of the population, Governor Abbott is willing to embrace safe spaces. We got to call it all out. So Glenn Greenwald, I think, was the perfect person. The perfect person to get on Governor Abbott about this. Let's dive in.
Republican Governor Greg Abbott of Texas has long been popular among conservatives, and that's what makes it so bizarre that yesterday he issued an executive order. And when doing so, he invoked a phrase to justify that executive order that is probably the single most mocked and ridiculed phrase in right-wing discourse. And he didn't invoke this phrase ironically. or as a way of making some kind of point. He invoked it earnestly. And the way that I know that is because he has a long history of embracing measures very similar to the one that he embraced yesterday, and has done so repeatedly for the same objective. And it's not just Greg Abbott, but red state legislatures and Republican governors throughout the country have also embraced similar measures for similar reasons. And so before we comment on that, let me just show you exactly what it is that he said here from the office of the Texas Governor, Greg Abbott, on March 27th, 2024. You see the headline, Governor Abbott fights anti-Semitic acts at Texas colleges and universities. And he's touting a executive order that he issued, and it says the following, quote, "The governor's executive order requires that all higher education institutions in Texas review their free speech policies to establish appropriate punishments for anti-Semitic rhetoric," which is another word for speech.
That's right. So let's pause here for a second, because this can change. Remember what the Rabbi Barkley, when he was debating Candace Owens, remember what he said, that when it comes to the definition of anti-Semitism, that it's based on feeling. Remember that? So they can always change the type of rhetoric to fit that narrative. So Glenn is right when he says he said anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is another word for speech. He's correct. That's basically what they're saying. And we're noticing that the definition keeps changing, right? So think about that for students in Texas. This is just another way for them to try to prevent the students at the colleges from protesting.
On college and university campuses, ensure that policies that address the sharp rise of anti-Semitic acts are enforced, and include the definition of anti-Semitism in free speech policies. Now, note here, among other things, that he is not protecting all Texas students from being attacked for their views or for their religious beliefs or for their identity. He's issuing an executive order that is designed to protect one group of students and only one group of students, namely Jewish students, from only one type of bigotry, namely anti-Semitism. He's not protecting students from anti-Black racism or anti-white racism or Islamophobia or transphobia or xenophobia or any other kind of bigotry. This is a measure that is designed to protect one particular group of people in the society identified by a demographic characteristic, and is designed to require that universities enact measures to combat a certain kind of rhetoric aimed at a certain kind of group.
So, to that point, how is that any different from the complaints that have come from conservative politicians who have complained, like people like Ron DeSantis, for example, have complained about CRT, which is critical race theory, right, which tends to focus on a particular group? How is that any different from those complaints when they said we should not be singling out people by their race or their gender? You know, everybody should have the same type of, education. We should not single people out, and we're all supposed to have the students learn together, etc. We're not going to have affirmative action. We're not going to do these things. How is that any different? So what I've told you before, and what you're seeing that is starting to come to light with more and more people as more hypocrisy is exposed, is that at the end of the day, it is okay to do that when it comes to one particular group. So what we're seeing, folks, is that our politicians are showing us that one particular group is better than others. They are prioritizing that particular group, because Governor Abbott isn't making this type of law. This is done by executive order, by the way. He's not making this type of law in reference to any other group at colleges in Texas. Let's continue.
Not hateful rhetoric in general, just rhetoric that he deems to be hateful in particular toward this group in particular. The executive order that he signed is here. And it went on, quote, it cites the following: incidents of anti-Semitism have increased since Hamas's attack, and the proliferation of anti-Semitism at public universities is particularly concerning. Multiple protests and walkouts have been staged by university student organizations, with students chanting anti-Semitic phrases such as "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free."
Now, see, this is where someone like Bill Ackman comes in, because you have to remember it was Bill Ackman who actually railed about that phrase on social media. He was the one that pushed for Claudine Gay to be removed as the president of Harvard. He was the one that's got the ball rolling on this. And Bill Ackman is a billionaire. So this was another example to show you how billionaires are actually making decisions in this country. And especially those that are Zionists. Remember what Miko Palit said, these are very powerful. Zionists are very powerful. They're a powerful network of people. So add billionaire to that and just imagine how much that you can do. So he was the one that got the ball rolling on this. That gives Governor Abbott the permission and other people the permission to say, okay, well, that rhetoric is anti-Semitic. Now they got people out there saying that Christ is King is also problematic now too. What else is going to be next?
Now, there again, he's explicitly stating that the motivation for adopting this measure is not that students are being violently attacked, but that instead they're hearing political phrases that upset them, like Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. I thought that it was pretty much of a consensus among conservatives and Republicans and people on the right that words are not violence. Mm-hmm. And yet, again, over and over, this executive order cites things like speech and rhetoric and political phrases. It then goes on. Section 519315C2 of the Texas Education Code provides that students should not participate in, and higher education institutions should not allow, expression that is unlawful or disrupts the operations and of the institution.
Now let's highlight the word expression, because that could mean anything. You know, does that mean that you can't wear a t-shirt that has a Palestinian flag on it? That's expression. It can relate to your clothing. What if you have a Palestinian flag like on your car? Like the same way, you know, some people have like Dominican flags or Puerto Rican flags on their car. Like, what do you mean by expression? That's vague, and that can be applied to so many different things. I hope people realize just how dangerous this is. Because I know some people will point and they'll say, oh, it's just Texas. For now, this can also spread. You know, what does this mean? What does it mean? Listen, I'm going to tell you how this went very wrong when I was in high school. When I was in high school, we had a new principal. His name was Dr. Parker. Dr. Parker, and you had to call him doctor. Dr. Parker was a no-nonsense type of dude. He wasn't there long. He didn't stay the whole year because Dr. Parker pissed off a lot of people, and he took a promotion at the as a superintendent at the board, right? So Dr. Parker decided to create this rule that students were not allowed to wear Marilyn Manson t-shirts. Now, all this started because one kid wore a Marilyn Manson t-shirt that said, I'll say this on here, COCK sucker, right? And it was a Marilyn Manson like band t-shirt or whatever. So he made a rule that you could not wear Marilyn Manson t-shirts. So you got to understand, at this point in time, like Marilyn Manson was actually pretty popular. I don't know where Marilyn's at today, but at that point in time, he was pretty popular. Then in turn, what happened is that those students said, that's not fair because that is a band that I listen to. So what about all the other students that wear t-shirts of the band that they listen to? Then Dr. Parker came back and changed the rule and made an announcement that said you could not wear any band t-shirts at all. Students actually staged a walkout. Dr. Parker wasn't there that much longer after that. So when we talk about this expression, that can mean so many different things.
And whereas anti-Semitism and the harassment of Jewish students have no place on Texas university campuses and will not be tolerated by my administration, therefore I, Greg Abbott, Governor of Texas, by virtue of the power and authority vested in me by the Constitution and laws of the state of Texas, hereby direct all Texas higher education institutions to do the following. 1, review and update free speech policies. This is a Republican governor, a conservative governor, part of a political movement in the United States that has spent years objecting to attacks on free speech on college campuses, speech codes on college campuses in the name of protecting certain minority groups from bigoted speech. And this is exactly what this order is designed to do. He is directing that Texas universities, colleges, update their free speech policies to address the sharp rise in anti-Semitic speech. And then he adds on, and acts, but the only kinds of acts cited on university campuses are things like chanting. Obviously, if somebody attacks Jewish students or threatens Jewish students with violence, it's already a crime. Or it's already a violation of campus code, but it's also a crime in society. You can't physically attack people or threaten to attack people with violence anywhere in the United States without committing a crime. You don't need to change free speech codes at Texas campuses to address that. You just need to change Texas free speech codes to constrict the kinds of views that people are permitted to express about a foreign country, Israel, if you want to make Jewish students feel more comfortable, which is exactly what Greg Abbott, when justifying this executive order, said was his goal. It went on. 2, ensure that these policies are being enforced on campuses and that groups such as the Palestine Solidarity Committee and Students for Justice in Palestine are disciplined for violating these policies. He does not say that pro-Israel student groups should be punished in any way if they violate these policies, or any other group for that matter.
No, he's singling out the Palestinian groups. And this is very problematic. This is exactly what I was trying to point towards. Notice this doesn't apply to any other organizations or groups on campus. He's only singling out the Palestinian groups.
Singling out one group of students that he wants to protect, Jewish students, one type of speech that he wants to constrict, which is criticism of Israel or pro-Palestinian speech, and one type of student group that he wants to target and punish, which are pro-Palestinian groups. Now, all of these measures are completely aligned with Greg Abbott's own personal political views. He's a fanatical supporter of Israel. Greg Abbott's not Jewish. He's an evangelical Christian. And he has talked about the importance of Israel to him personally and to his religion and to his culture. And he has every right to be a fanatical supporter of Israel if he wants, for whatever reasons, religious, political, ideological. That's, of course, within his rights. But to trifle with speech codes on college campuses in Texas, by tightening the permissive range of speech to prevent people from expressing views that Greg Abbott finds offensive, to protect a particular cause that is important to Greg Abbott, and to punish student groups whose cause and whose views are antithetical to his, is the exact kind of tyranny that conservatives have been denouncing, rightfully so, when it has come from the liberal left in multiple ways, including on college campuses over the last decade. He goes on, quote, number 3, include the definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the state of Texas in section 448.001 of the Texas Government Code in university free speech policies to guide university personnel and students on what constitutes anti-Semitic speech. Now, I believe that we have the tweet, and if we don't, we should get it.
Pause here for just a second. Now, what is the best way? Because we want to talk about solutions as well. And Trell actually already hit it in the chat. What is the best way for them to fight back against this? Trell said, if all these athletes start protesting, I bet they would not do this. Bingo. Because a lot of the colleges in Texas, right, These are sports schools. I call them sports schools, but football is king in Texas. So I went to a sports school too, so I know football is king in Texas. If you were able to get, for all those students in those organizations, the Palestinian organizations, reach out to members of the football team. Reach out to members on the basketball team. And if you can get them to walk out, then maybe some things could change. Because unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of those colleges, particularly in the South, Southwest, Southeast, sports really matters. And these colleges really depend on game days, boosters, etc. And the last thing they want is for these sports programs to fall apart. They care more about that than they do about the academic departments, just keeping it real. If you can get the football players, the basketball players, if you can get them to join you in solidarity and have some type of a walkout, which is a very peaceful demonstration, then maybe things could change and maybe they would listen. You got to hit them in the pocket. You got to hit them where the money is at. Take away the athletes. They'll listen. It's a reality. They'll listen. You know how many professional athletes came from colleges in Texas?
Where Governor Abbott explains the reason for this executive order and specifically says that he wants to create safe spaces for Jewish students. So I don't see that tweet here. So we're going to get that tweet though. But when Greg Abbott announced his executive order, he explicitly said that the reason for this executive order was that he wants to create what he explicitly called safe spaces on Texas's campus. Let me just show you the tweet that Governor Abbott posted when he announced the executive order. There you see it on the screen. He said, this is Governor Abbott yesterday, quote, "Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas. Today I issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of anti-Semitism at Texas colleges and universities. Texas stands with our Jewish students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the Jewish community." Now, just imagine, had this been about any other group, imagine if Governor Abbott had said, anti-black racism, can we put that tweet back on the screen, please? Anti-black racism will not be tolerated in Texas. Today I'm issuing an executive order to fight the increase in acts of racism at Texas colleges. Texas stands with our black students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the black community.
Pause for a second. So this is where the hypocrisy comes in. And this is what I was pointing to before. We're seeing a lot of hypocrisy the past couple of weeks, because for years, we have seen people like Governor Abbott, like Ron DeSantis, Republican politicians actually, rail against this idea of safe spaces and refer to it as, this is woke culture and we reject that. But that was in reference to other groups. To Glenn's point, that was in reference to Black Americans. That was in reference to the LGBTQ community. That was in reference to Latino community. That was in reference to the minority groups. But when it comes to Israel, and see, this is how, again, everything shifts when it comes to Israel. This is why you'll see people actually be correct about the Ukraine war and say, stop funding Ukraine. We need to get out of this. But once you change that country to Israel, all of a sudden everything shifts. So you have to understand who is actually telling us what to do here, because the United States government is willing to bend over backwards for Israel. But Netanyahu won't even listen to one small demand from Joe Biden. It says, I'm going to do what I want. Netanyahu says he's going to do what he wants. This is why this happens, is because we have so much big money in electoral politics, because the Israeli lobby owns a lot of these politicians. You should not have an AIPAC. You should not have it. How do you have a lobby that represents another country in this country having so much control over our politicians? So that shouldn't be there. But this is another hypocritical moment. Now, all of a sudden, when it comes to protecting Jewish students, now all of a sudden, safe spaces are okay. So no, this is a problem.
Imagine the anger and mockery that would have provoked among almost every conservative I can think of. Or imagine if he had said, transphobia will not be tolerated in Texas. Today, I issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of transphobia on Texas campuses. Texas stands with our trans students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the LGBT community. That would have probably led to his impeachment. Why is this any different? Why is this any better? To constrict speech, to direct administrators to trifle with free speech codes, to more broadly define anti-Semitism?
And also, conservatives need to speak out against this the same way that people are speaking out against Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire's decisions. People like you guys, like if you're watching, you're conservative, you should be railing against this, pushing back heavily on Governor Abbott, because this is ridiculous.
To punish the expression of political phrases that make Jewish students feel unsafe, to turn college campuses into safe spaces, not for everybody, but solely for Jewish students, who, according to Governor Abbott, and if you look at the executive order as we just did, he's not claiming there's an epidemic of violence against Jewish students. He's claiming that there's a expression of views against Israel that's making them feel uncomfortable. And the argument has always been, I've been a big supporter of this argument, that college students are adults. And if there's any place in the country where free speech should reign, where dissent should reign, where even taboos should be able to be permitted to be expressed, where orthodoxies have to be challenged without constraints, it's an academia. That's what academia is for. And one of the things you send your adult children to college in order to do is learn how to hear arguments that make them uncomfortable and to engage with them and to think critically, not to be shielded and protected by them. And yet here you have a Republican governor doing exactly that, which conservatives have said for years they find reprehensible and dangerous. And again, he's not doing it as tit for tat or ironically, because he's been doing it for many years, long before October 7th, as we'll show you. Now, one of the people, as I was saying, who, in addition to Candace Owen and Tucker Carlson and several others, who is objecting, and I think this is the first time he's stood up and spoke out on this in response to Governor Abbott, is Christopher Rufo, who has been working with Governor DeSantis on the Florida educational system, and in particular trying to remove notions that any particular group of people will be discriminated against by dogma or by university policy. And Christopher Rufo, in response to Governor Abbott's executive order, said the following, quote, "I am committed to the fight against anti-Semitism on campus, but I am concerned about the highlighted provisions in Governor Abbott's executive order, which instructs universities to, quote, update free speech policies to prohibit, quote, anti-Semitic speech. How is such a policy different from DEI programs, which are diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that conservatives have begun to focus on?"
Because let me jump in here and explain to you what's actually happened here. Because remember, one of the things that was eventually revealed from Bill Ackman, who was pushing back against DEI and all this stuff when the protests happened, is that it wasn't so much that he had a problem with DEI, but the problem that he had was the fact that it did not include Jewish people. That's where that came from. That was revealed later on. The problem that he had wasn't so much about the plagiarism. His wife was caught with plagiarism as well. The problem that he had was the fact that it did not include Jewish people. The masks are coming off, ladies and gentlemen.
In a very negative way. He says, how is such a policy different from DEI programs promising to prohibit, quote, anti-black speech? And why not include anti-white speech, which, as I have shown in my reporting, is institutionalized at the University of Texas? What is the rationale for one but not the other, or the others? He goes on, the problem to me seems to be conduct rather than speech, shutting down speakers, threatening students, mobilizing mobs, calling for violence, all of which can be regulated as prohibited conduct with the universal rather than particular policy. Exactly. If you really want to limit conduct, and I think you need to be very careful that you're not limiting legitimate political protest, the idea that you're going to enact special rules for special groups is madness.
But here we are.
And that you're going to single out particular student groups that have a policy view and an ideology that differ from the Republican governor is so blatantly tyrannical. Why would these rules not apply to every single student equally?
I told you guys that this is where we were headed. I told you this is what the ultimate goal they were trying to do. They're basically trying to make the United States like the United States of Israel. I told you, because they are very angry about the fact that so many people are supporting the Palestinian, right to freedom, their right for self-determination. They were not expecting that, and they didn't know how to handle that. And so now it's like, let's see if we can do everything that we can to make sure that the priority here is going to be for those who are Jewish in this country. Now, the same people that'll sit up there and tell you that we're all supposed to be treated the same. Nobody should be given, preference over another. But here are those same people giving preference over other groups. So that's the hypocrisy. And I sincerely hope more of you that are Republican, I sincerely hope that you push back on that and call out Governor Abbott for that, because it's ridiculous. Think about where this could affect all of us in reference to free speech. JB says, wait, safe spaces? Yep, safe spaces. Remember that whole deal? Thank you for the super chat, H. Democrats are lost in words and deed. Shalon says, my family is all in Texas, diehard Christian Republicans, and even they are mad about this one. Yeah. JB says, so where was this policy to combat racist and anti-Black speech? Exactly. And thank you for the super chat, John. The boomers got to have their free speech and anti-war movement in the 60s. They won't let the rest of us have ours now. Oh my God, that is such a good point, John, because think about like the Vietnam War protest, right? People were saying make love, not war. Like they were really wilding out. Like you look back and you watch some of those old videos like during the Vietnam protests, and I'm like, wow, they went all the way in. But he's right. We need to have our free speech, not just moment right now, but also in the future. I feel like we're moving backwards. It's 2024. I feel like we're going backwards. What a mess. All right. And I think we're ready to move into the next one. Okay, yeah. And then I think, okay, yeah. All right. We're going to get into the hot button topic for the day, I think. And that is this conversation here with Sonny Hostin of The View and Coleman Hughes has really pressed a lot of buttons. I've already seen a number of videos. This time I actually did watch something before I decided to cover it. I saw a number of videos that has covered this, and there are certain things that I think are left out that I do want you to see. Now, before we get into this discussion, one thing I do want to say is that what I do want you to understand is that regardless if you agree with Sonny or Coleman, and we're really going to break this down here, at the end of the day, what you have to know is that both Sonny and Coleman are status quo. Sonny Hostin is on The View because she approves and agrees with the status quo. She represents the status quo. Coleman Hughes is a part of CNN now. I don't know if everyone knows that, but he's on CNN because, again, he fits with the status quo. If you notice, mainstream media doesn't typically give these positions to people who are outside of that status quo. So always keep that in mind. So going into this conversation, we're actually going to go to the clip from Anna Kasparian because I found a little bit of hypocrisy here with her. And we'll chime in with this clip from her because it's really telling to me. And part of this has something to do with the reason why I really had to walk away from the Bernie Sanders, politic crowd, because I don't think they fully get it. I think that Coleman and Sonny both have valid points, but I think there's more that needs to be discussed here. And I think there's also some things, I've already talked about Sonny on the show numerous times. There's some things I think that you need to see about Coleman Hughes. I think you need to understand where he actually is coming from. And I think you need to see who he's aligned with, so you understand why he may have the talking points that he has. Let's go ahead and dive into this clip here.
Many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here.
So we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on that.
Author and analyst Coleman Hughes was recently met with some intense hostility, specifically from Sonny Hostin on The View, as he appeared on the show to promote his new book, The End of Race Politics: Arguments for a Colorblind America. At a time when the culture in America has essentially rejected colorblindness, instead embracing an almost obsessive focus on race and how we differ from one another, I honestly wasn't shocked that he was met with that kind of vitriol. We'll get back to that portion of the exchange in just a minute. But first, I do think it's actually important to understand Coleman as a person and the argument he's trying to make. In the interest of full disclosure, though, I do have to admit that I'm a fan of Coleman's, even though he and I have some disagreements. He's more supportive of Israel's war on Gaza, as an example. On some issues, he definitely leans to the right of me, but—
Pause. He's a little bit more than just supportive of Israel's war on Gaza. It's more than him being supportive of it. We'll get into that as well, because I'm going to show you things that Anna's not going to show you.
I actually find him to be thoughtful. He makes thought-provoking arguments in good faith. And I don't know about you, but I've been increasingly bored with shows that have default ideological talking points that hosts never deviate from. It's a mindless snooze fest. Sometimes Coleman's analysis on certain current events challenge my own, and I find that to be a good thing. We should all be willing to challenge and reevaluate our own beliefs without assuming the one challenging us is some grifter or right-wing pawn. I think it makes us smarter and mentally stronger. Now, with that out of the way, let's hear Coleman out on the direction he believes policy should go in America.
The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use, Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way.
Okay, so let me pause here for just a second. So for those who are not aware, Coleman Hughes and Sonny are both Afro-Latino. But even though they're both Afro-Latino, they actually have very different upbringings. And I'm going to dive into that in just a little bit. I think I'll let this finish first, but I wanted to go ahead and get that out there so that you understand that, because that will be important. That's why he said Black and Latino, because he's Black and Latino. Let me go ahead.
Not my question, but when you say that socioeconomics picks out people in a better way than race, when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and Black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed.
All right. So let's come in here for just a second. The first thing I noticed with this conversation is that Sonny came in kind of hot. Where he was more calm about the situation, but she did come in kind of hot. And I wonder if some of that has to do with their background. And that's why I bring this up again. Both of them, we'll come back to this, both of them are Afro-Latino, but they did grow up very differently. And I want to show you the difference here. So Coleman is from Montclair, New Jersey. And I actually know people from Montclair, New Jersey. Okay. Suburban area, pretty well-to-do area. I'll show you here so you can see, because I wanted to bring this up. I think this is the income. If we look at Montclair, New Jersey, I just wanted to show you the diversity. Montclair, New Jersey actually has a diversity score of 97. So for people who are not aware, at one point in time, I think it was 2022, I should have this up here somewhere. 2022, Montclair, New Jersey was actually ranked as the most diverse, city in the United States. It is very diverse. I will give it that hands down. Suburbia, diverse area. And you can actually see the numbers here just to show you what you're dealing with here. 46.1% white, 12.1% Hispanic, 31.1% Black, 5.8% Asian, 0.0% Native American, and 5.0% other. It is not the norm when you compare it to other cities in the United States. It's just not. And a friend of mine grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, and she has said this as well. She said there's no other place like it from where she's lived in the United States, right? So take that into consideration. Now, I want to show you something else here as well about Montclair. Let me scroll down. Their stuff is a little small. I guess you can't do it because their stuff is small. When you look at their median income, the median income in Montclair, New Jersey is over $158,000. So that's pretty significant, I would say. I mean, I don't make $150,000. So that's pretty significant. Again, pretty well-to-do area. And then we can also take a look at the public schools in Montclair, New Jersey. Niche actually gave it an A. Right? It says Montclair Public Schools, they're highly rated. Public school district located in Montclair, New Jersey. It has like over 6,143 students in grades PK, K through 12, student to teacher ratio 14:1. So yeah, it says highly rated. So Coleman Hughes is coming from a place that is, not just diverse, very diverse, but is also suburbia and well-to-do. And he's Afro-Latino. This is the class difference from how they grew up. Sonny grew up in the Bronx. And I don't know if you've never been to the Bronx. I've been to the Bronx. One thing I can tell you is the poorest area in New York City. And it's been that way for years. You can go back to that. I went back to the Bronx like recently. It does not look different compared to how it looked like 5 years ago. So I wonder if that's where some of that hostility came in from Sonny, because I think she's kind of looking at him as like, look, you and I both are Afro-Latino, but they do have very different upbringings. So it almost seemed like the class perspective, which Coleman Hughes talks about a lot, it almost seems like that really comes into play between the two of them as well. Let's go on a little bit more here.
Argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed.
Look, I think Sonny Hostin's lack of logic here is what's fundamentally flawed. Just keeping it real. It's somewhat strange how triggered she is by the notion that we should focus economic policies on class rather than identity like race. I assure you there are plenty of poor people of all races in America. However,
let me pause. So this is what I have to say here about Anna. I think Anna is the last person that should be talking about class politics at this point in time, considering it was just a year ago, Anna Kasparian was actually advocating for criminalizing homeless people on TYT. So I don't think she's the one that needs to talk about class. No, it just stop. Just stop. So that's the hypocrisy about it. And this is something that I did notice as time went by with a lot of the people, a lot of the Bernie movement. And I supported Bernie Sanders. I was probably one of his biggest supporters. I donated money to him. But even I had some critiques when it came to some of the policies, some of the platforms, right? So what I noticed is I think there tends to be this idea that if you mention that Black people are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, which is true, there's this idea that you're not supposed to mention that. You're not supposed to focus on that. You're just supposed to focus on the universal policies. And as I've said before on this show, those universal policies would lift all boats. But even after you lift all boats, Black people would still be at the bottom. So they were focused on equality, the Bernie campaign, instead of focusing on equity. So if we're still at the bottom, then there still needs to be something done to make that adjustment. Let's continue a little bit more here.
She herself is a wealthy woman of color, so maybe class-based issues don't appeal to her the same way as they would for the working poor in America. And while it is true that Black and Latino Americans are more economically disadvantaged on average, it's also true that class-based policies would disproportionately benefit their lives without leaving poor white Americans behind.
So you see, this is the revealing moment, because right here, Anna admits that. She admits to you that she knows that we're at the bottom. She knows that we have to deal with this more, but she's still telling you that we should just give everything universal to everybody. And here's the thing, I've said this before, I still advocate for UBI. I still support those policies. I still think everybody should have healthcare in this country. I still think we should have free public college, but there is a piece when it comes to what is missing with repair. And what is missing with repair that has been done for other groups in the United States has not been done for American descendants of slavery. And these are the type of discussions that I noticed, like Anna Kasparian and a lot of people. This is not just a conservative thing. Don't think it's just conservatives that don't want to talk about reparations. This was an issue in the progressive community as well. Bernie Sanders told you, no, he didn't agree with it. But Bernie Sanders had no problem signing off on legislation for reparations for his people. People had no problem with giving cash reparations to Japanese Americans and their descendants that were part of the internment camps. It's only when you bring up American descendants of slavery. And that's what I want you guys to pay close attention to that. So we all realize that, yes, there are class issues within this country. I acknowledge that. I've said that on the show multiple times. I talk about the people at the top. But when all these people come to you and they talk about closing the racial wealth gap, and they say things to you about canceling student loan debt or implementing baby bonds, these things have already been debunked by the data and the research. And you can see this for yourself in Dr. Darity's book. He did the research. I've interviewed him on the show. I've interviewed Marcel Dixon. There have been a number of people that have actually come on with data to break it down. So that is something to understand. When it comes to Coleman Hughes, I'm not going to go too hard on him because Coleman Hughes, he's young. He's very young. I think he's like 26 years old, right? And he has this idea of having a colorblind society. I'm not going to hate on him for that. I, at one point, felt that way. So I understand what he's saying. I understand where he's coming from. I also have been in similar position that Sonny has been in. So I understand where she's coming from. But we need to talk about how both of them have valid points instead of just these videos I saw earlier this morning, actually, which was so-and-so takes down this person and stuff like that. I think they both had valid points. I will say, I do think Sonny came in a little bit too hot. Like she came in hot. I'm like, just chill.
Why is that a bad thing? Don't we want to see all of our fellow Americans succeed, regardless of religion, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc.? Class-based economic policies have more buy-in among voters and tend to be harder to repeal because they're applied to everyone impacted by poverty. Coleman managed to maintain his composure, something that he's insanely skilled in, and responded, in my opinion, perfectly.
There's two separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you. They're not.
Yeah, they're not, and the stats show that.
But yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor. But
so this is the part where I have to jump in here, because you see, now I'm starting to hear, when I heard this, I was like, those are similar talking points to mainstream, like mainstream media makes those same talking points when they talk about MLK. MLK also said, we're coming to get our check. I'm going to show you what MLK said in just a second. You know, so it's easy to mention that part. People also need to take into consideration that towards the end, you know, of his fight and his activism, MLK actually started to change his mind about some of the positions that he had. And he started to question some of the decisions that he made. He started to question whether or not a nonviolent approach was the right thing to do. He also said that he feared that he actually sent his people into a burning house. So we need to, when we talk about MLK, we need to make sure we talk about all of it and not just the part that mainstream media is telling you, because that's the same talking point I hear on mainstream media.
they will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be addressed.
He's right. I mean, I think he makes really good points there. But look, maybe Sonny Hostin has a counterpoint that we haven't even considered. So let's keep an open mind and give her a chance to respond.
You claim that color blindness was the goal of the civil rights movement, based upon Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, you know, content of character versus the color of skin. He also said in 1968, it was about less than a week before he was assassinated, this country never stops to realize that they owe a people kept in slavery for 244 years. So rather than class, he did write about that earlier on. Right before his death, he made the argument for racial equality and racial reparations. And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted.
The quote that you just...
Pause right there for just a second, because we're going to come back to that as well. So this is the thing. We're going to talk a little bit about hypocrisy again here, right? Because Sonny is saying all this, but at the same time, Sonny, time and time again, has come onto that show and has told you to support the people that did not have a reparations plan. Sonny has told you to support Joe Biden. The people, all the candidates that had some type of reparations plan or have a reparations plan right now, Sonny is not backing those people because those people are outside of the status quo. At the end of the day, she's saying this right now because she believes that Coleman is conservative, although Coleman says he's not conservative. So she feels like I'm going to go harder towards him because it's coming from him. But at the end of the day, Sonny, you know, you saying all that, but you didn't say that when Joe Biden was sitting in that seat. You didn't say that when Bernie Sanders was sitting in that seat. All the stuff you're talking about with repair, all the politicians that came onto the show, The View, you never brought this up. And in fact, I remember when Marianne came onto the show, when she was talking about reparations, you actually were pretty nasty to her. All of you guys were nasty to her. When Andrew Yang came onto The View, when he talked about UBI, all of you guys were nasty to him the first time that he came on. So it's really interesting. That's why I said there's a lot of hypocrisy here. I understand where both sides are coming from. I understand what he's saying about having this vision of a colorblind society where your race doesn't matter. Like your race shouldn't be the basis of things, where we can just look at each other as humans, but that's not the reality. But I understand where he's coming from because I used to have that same way of thinking. Sonny, I understand where she's coming from when she's saying that we're at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, so we can't just focus on class. But at the same time, when you had candidates that came on that show who actually said those things, Sonny was against those people. So to me, it's a hot mess.
Just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro. That's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was.
Yes.
And it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We Can't Wait.
I gotta say, I mean, I didn't notice until this very moment, but the fact that she's rejecting class-based politics while wearing a Gucci button down and a Gucci belt is hilarious. But nonetheless,
you really don't have any room to talk, Anna, because like I said, you've been all over the place the past year and a half, and you were sitting up there saying that homeless people should be criminalized. So you don't really respect class-based politics either. Can't remember the last time I even saw you talk to someone who was working class. So get out of here with that mess. Get out of here. Get out of here with that mess. Okay. So let me break something down for you for just a second, because I want to talk about 3 different environments. Because I told you that Coleman came from Montclair, New Jersey, very diverse area, suburban, good schools, etc. Sonny grew up in the Bronx. They're both Afro-Latino. We talk about race and class. I can kind of point to a little bit of my own experience. I had the experience of growing up. I've lived in a white neighborhood, predominantly white neighborhood. I lived in a very diverse area, similar to Coleman, and I've lived in an all Black neighborhood in Baltimore, Maryland. So I've had experience living in different types. Where do you think I experienced the most racism? Tell me in the chat. I'll wait. Where do you think? The diverse neighborhood, the white neighborhood, the Black neighborhood? I'll go ahead and tell you. I'm pretty sure most of you can figure this out. I experienced the most racism in the white neighborhood. Where I understand where Coleman gets his logic from is my experience growing up in the military community in Germany, overseas. I understand it because when I was in Germany, we lived in a military community. So when I was in Germany, like, I went to school with everybody. I had friends of all different races. Like, to me, I felt like this was the norm. So I had friends and classmates that were Asian, Black, white, biracial. You know, 2 of my best friends were biracial. I didn't even realize that was like a thing until I got out of that environment. So during that time, I really did believe, yeah, you know, people aren't racist anymore. Racism isn't an issue. And then we moved. And when we came back to the States, while my dad was getting things ready for us in North Carolina, because it was during the school year, I had to go to school. So I stayed with my grandmother while my dad was handling that stuff. And I stayed with my grandmother in Baltimore, Maryland, all Black neighborhood in the inner city. I wasn't in Beemore County, okay? So don't be like, oh, you were in the county. I was not in the county. I was in the inner city in Baltimore, Maryland, and I went to Lockham and Bundy. And that was when I started to see things differently, because I didn't realize just how good I had it. And so when I hear Coleman talk, it reminds me of how I used to feel until I got out of that environment and I had to live somewhere else. So I went from attending a Dodge school where the government paid for everything. I was able to be in all these different sports. I was in the band. I didn't have to pay for those things. The schools were nice. The cafeteria food was actually decent. Like, we had everything. To going to Lockham and Bundy in the inner city in Baltimore, where we were lucky if we had heat. All of a sudden, I started to realize I had things a lot better off than I thought I did. I had people waiting for me for school when I came home from school and telling me to do my homework. My classmates did not. Most of my classmates had single parents. These kids were raising themselves. I saw the inequality. I saw the inequities. But what I did not really have to deal with, still, even in the Black neighborhood, was the racism issue, except for when the police came in and they didn't live in the neighborhood. The Baltimore police patrolling in my grandmother's neighborhood, it was usually white cops and they didn't live there. So I knew not to even be near the police. But I wonder how I would have felt if I never had that change of environment. I wonder if I still would have thought like Coleman Hughes. So all of a sudden I'm looking around and I see abandoned houses and kids don't have what they need. I see the school is under-resourced, underfunded. Then we moved to North Carolina. My parents bought a house in North Carolina and I went to a predominantly white school. And all of a sudden I was back at a school that had everything again. But then I had to deal with the racism. That was when I started to realize that my idea of this color blindness, a lot of people really did not feel that way. And racism in the South tends to be more overt instead of covert. So I got called all kinds of names. I think that for those of us that grew up in diverse areas, there are pros and cons to that. One of the pros is that you're introduced to all these different cultures, right? So you learn a lot from each other. You learn a lot about different cultures. One of the cons, though, could be that you could actually grow up with the perception believing that that is how the rest of the world is. And I think it's important to see how other people live. So I was sheltered. And I got a dose of reality. I used to have that mindset that like, oh, all I had to do was just work hard, do well in school, and you can get anything that you fight for. And like I said, I sat there and I remember in Baltimore, and I remember some of the kids who did work really hard still couldn't get out of poverty. And if you don't have to live through that, you don't know what it's like. Most people will never get out of poverty. Most people won't. And it's even worse when you go into the inner city Black neighborhoods where even the people who had businesses at one point can't afford to keep them because they're being bought out by other groups. Now, all of a sudden, the beauty supply store and the convenience store no longer belongs to the people in the neighborhood. This happens all across the country. I think that Sonny came in hot. Go to the next part of Type VNC, Corey. But I do want to show you something because, you know, I watched this and I've listened to Coleman before. And I've wondered to myself, why does Coleman, you know, feel this way? So I did have to look a little bit at his history, right? At his background to understand why he has this perception. And then it all started to make sense. So Coleman Hughes was actually on Black News Channel, and he was talking to Mark Lamont Hill. I want to take you back to something. There was something I noticed here. Coleman Hughes is against reparations, right? He was actually part of a panel, him and Candace Owens, and he was advocating against it. But listen to what I want you to hear. I want you to hear what he's saying about why he's against it. And that the part to me is really problematic because it's the framing. Listen to this.
You talk about it as a moral mistake as well as a political mistake. What's the moral mistake here?
The moral mistake is that obviously when the victims of a historical crime are still alive, there is a moral obligation of the perpetrators to pay reparations. When we're talking about, so for instance, it would be a morally necessary, in my opinion, as I said at the hearing, to pay reparations for Jim Crow to survivors of the Jim Crow system. Now, on the other hand, when you're talking about the median Black American being around, 35 years old or so, born in the 80s, is there a moral obligation to take money from one group of people and give it to that person for a crime that happened 200 years ago?
Pause. The problem with this conversation is the framing. And Mark Lamont Hill didn't catch this when he had the interview. I don't know if Coleman is aware of this, but I've interviewed multiple reparations activists on the show, and the framing is wrong. Reparations is not paid for by you or me. It is not paid for through taxpayer money. I don't know how many times and how many books need to be written or how many interviews need to happen for people to get this through their head. So Coleman Hughes, the message that he is delivering, and he delivered at that hearing that he's referring to, this message is incorrect. It is giving the audience the impression that they would be paying for it, that your tax dollars would pay for it. Your tax dollars don't pay for reparations. The government would pay for it. This has been explained so many different times. I don't know why. And I sat there and I watched this discussion, and Mark Lamont Hill didn't catch it. So this is another thing where people are being misinformed. They're misinformed and they're being misled. Now listen to this part.
That's a very different situation, and one in which you have to consider whether it's politically wise to do that, whether it actually serves the interests of the community that is suffering from many different problems in the present that need to be solved. To frame that solution as reparations, saying essentially blaming a group of people that don't feel connected to the crime because it was so long ago, right? So that's what I mean by a moral and political mistake.
So there's a few leaps there that I want to unpack with you for a minute. So you start by saying that it would be a morally proper thing to do if the victims of a crime were still alive. And then when we get to these people born in the 1980s, you're saying, well, if the redress comes through them, if we give it to their great-great-great-grandchildren, it produces a political sort of challenge and crisis for the community, if I understand you correctly. And it may not be the proper way to address the needs of the broader community. Understood. I hear that argument. That still doesn't address why it would be not moral to do so, right? If for example, there were a person who was enslaved and slavery ends and they have a child, just one generation, just a child who was denied access to housing, healthcare, and in general American prosperity because their parent was a slave, an enslaved African. Would you, just in that example, would you say that it would be improper to give reparations to them?
Yeah, so that I think in that case, probably it would be proper. And obviously it's a case by case basis, but the closer you are to the crime, the more plausible and morally required it is to give somebody reparations. And you always have to take into account the other side of the equation here, right? If my grandfather does something if your grandfather did something horrible to my grandfather, I couldn't necessarily come to you and expect you to pay me directly, right? That would be immoral. So obviously, the closer you are to the crime, you're exactly right. The more necessary, the more morally required it is, and it's a damn shame that reparations were not paid to recently freed slaves and their children. Unfortunately, it is a different situation we're dealing with today.
So we got to come in here for a second, because you see, it was paid to other groups. So the question that I would have for Coleman, because I know that he's pro-Israel, the question that I would have for Coleman, what would he say? Let's go ahead and pull this up here and I'll bring up the other one. What would he say about what Kathy Hochul just did? What would he say about this? This just happened. New York has secured over $183 million in compensation for Holocaust victims and their heirs. Hate has no home in New York, and my administration is committed to uplifting survivors and their families while honoring the memory of 6 million lives taken far too soon. This was January of this year. So would Coleman Hughes reject Kathy Hochul giving more compensation to Holocaust victims? I don't think he would, because if he would, I don't think Barry Weiss would still be aligned with him. You'll see that in just a second. We go on here to say, this is what people are bringing this up. Look at this. Here's Nico. Did the U.S. actively participate in the Holocaust? If not, why are you paying for the damages you didn't cause? Why haven't you shown the same urgency when it comes to reparations for Black people who have not only been harmed by reverberating impact of slavery, but even the policies that followed thereafter? Good point. Here's Roger Meadows. That reparations bill that you did was for a study. How is it that they get a check, but we get a study? There we go again. I told you. See, look, here's JB. So reparations, I mean, y'all literally got rid of Seneca Village to put in Central Park in NYC. Just because New York isn't a southern state, that doesn't mean y'all didn't participate or profit off of slavery. A debt is owed, Catherine. So you see the this is what I was trying to tell you guys. This is the hypocrisy. So would Coleman Hughes reject that? Would Coleman Hughes go participate in a hearing to push back on that? Probably not, because it's for a different group of people. These kind of things we need to pay close attention to. I told you guys before, I've been taking notes, and I'm seeing a lot of these Zionists, what they have done is they are propping up Black faces who actually already are against things for our community. You notice this? Pay attention. Pay attention. Now, I really do believe that Coleman does feel this way. I believe that he actually does believe this. But what I'm saying is, if you notice, this guy's everywhere. He's a political analyst at CNN. Okay? They don't take just anybody. They take people who are going to maintain the status quo. And they've also hired a lot of Zionists. So pay close attention to those things. Why do you think this guy is everywhere? On mainstream media. I'm not talking about independent media. Mainstream media. Why do you think that is? Think about it, folks. Have you seen them invite, and we're going to bring up Bree here in just a second. Have you seen Bree on The View? Have you seen Bree on The Breakfast Club? Outside of Bernie Sanders' campaign, have you seen Bree on CNN? No, you haven't. There are certain people that they bring forward. This piece here I also want to show you, because Bree actually interviewed Coleman. I want you to hear what he said here in reference to race and class. Listen to this.
Politically, I'm an independent. I've only voted twice for president, and I voted both times for Hillary and for Biden for Democrats, mainly because I did not like Trump.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I'm not actually a Republican. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. And a lot of my views on race and racial inequality would be categorized as conservative. So in that sense, I accept that label. But
so he accepts the conservative label, but he's an independent. And I did want to mention this part because I'm noticing some of the news articles, they do define him as a conservative. So I did want to take you back to this discussion that he had with Bree, where he explained he was an independent. But listen to this.
Yeah, I didn't really come to politics by thinking about it as liberal versus conservative. I came to it from a philosophy background mainly. And so, basically I was a person that didn't really care very much about race or didn't think very much about race growing up. I grew up in a very diverse liberal suburb of New York, and I had friends of every race, but I mainly connected to people on the basis of our shared interests, like music or anything like that. And then I got to Columbia University, and suddenly, every week in the student newspaper, someone was writing about how they experienced racism on campus, in one of the most progressive, subcultures that exists on Earth. And there was this general, new to me, kind of hysteria and hyperventilation about white supremacy, which felt very strange to me because it didn't capture my reality, it didn't capture what I was seeing day to day. And I became very curious. Why is it that people are hyperventilating about white supremacy and racism in a way that seems to me to be irrational and unconnected from reality? That's when I became really curious, and I applied my brain and my love of philosophy, and I started reading voraciously people like Glenn Lowry, who has been on this podcast, who is a hero of mine, John McWhorter and others, and found that the explanations that they gave about race and racial inequality, from many of these people are Black conservatives. Thomas Sowell, probably the greatest Black conservative writer of the 20th century. Their general viewpoints on the matter appealed to me much more than what I was being told from most of Black liberal writers, progressive writers, and certainly most other professors, writers, and elites on campus.
What about their writings appealed to you?
It seemed more connected to reality. It seemed to accept the basic fact of how much progress has been made in reducing racism in this country. If I talk to my grandfather about what it was like to grow up during Jim Crow, he's astounded at the life that I'm able to lead. I remember a couple months ago, he visited me and he saw me at a table, just like socializing effortlessly with white people. And he comes up to me after and he goes, "It's amazing to me that's just so easy for you, because you just didn't, growing up, you could not cross the color line in my day." And so when I hear the way that racism is talked about in America on the left right now, you could go for a pretty long time without hearing anyone acknowledge that more than a little progress has been made, that a lot of progress has been made.
So let me just jump in here for just a second. So I, for one, don't think I'm one of those people that said there's been no progress made. I've talked about progress that has been made, but it's kind of clear to me that I think Coleman is touching on overt racism and not talking about covert racism. Are there some people that will exaggerate and make it seem like every day I walk outside my door, I'm faced with racism every day, or someone yells something at me? Yeah, I mean, that's extreme. That does not happen to me every day, obviously. But there are different forms. There's structural racism, there's systemic racism. But more commonly, what we tend to deal with in the Northeast, and it's interesting that Coleman isn't mentioning this because he lives in the Northeast as well, is covert racism. That's what we usually have to deal with here. In the South, people are a little bit more direct. They'll just call you these things to your face. They tell you exactly how you feel. You know what you are going to get. In the Northeast, it's done in a different way. And you have to deal with racism when it comes to real estate. And as someone who has gone through the home buying process, I know what that is like. So I'm going to be very clear and real with you. These things do exist. I think Coleman would like to have a colorblind society. I wish we lived in a society where it didn't matter and where everybody could just look at each other as human beings and not have a prejudice about you because of the color of your skin. But that is not the world that we live in. And that was something that I had to come to understand when I was young. So I get what he's saying. But we cannot sit here and pretend like these incidents, and it's not just a one-off of police brutality. It's the structural things that are in place. It's the criminal justice system, how obviously a Black person and a white person can have the same record and the Black person gets more time. It's that. It's employment, where it's been proven time and time again that obviously if you have a name that doesn't sound as Black, people are usually surprised to see me and see that I look like me. People are surprised especially if they talk to me on the phone. A lot of times people they'll assume that I'm a white woman. And especially if they see my last name. Salvati is my married name. So people assume that when I walk in for an interview, They assume they're going to talk to a white woman. And I can always tell, I see the surprise on their face when I walk in and they're like, oh, right? So there are different things that we do deal with in this country. And I think that in an ideal world, we could have something like what Coleman's talking about. But until we fix these issues with the structural racism, and we fix these issues with systemic racism, and then you have to pay the debt that is owed. There has to be a cause for repair. And I think with Coleman, and you'll see this when we get to the Barry Weiss situation with Coleman, when I think with Coleman, my question for you would be, in reference to that type of repair, do you think it was unfair for Germany to pay reparations to Jewish people? Do you think that should not have happened? Do you disagree with Kathy Hochul paying reparations right now? This is new. It also happened under Barack Obama. Do you disagree with that? Or do you only disagree with it when it applies to American descendants of slavery? Did you disagree with it when reparations were paid to Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps and their descendants? Because part of the reason why, and someone who lived in Germany, part of the reason why they were able to come to a place of healing is because they did make repair. We never healed in this country. We never healed from that. People here haven't healed from Jim Crow. People mention slavery. Let's talk about Jim Crow. That wasn't that long ago. My parents were alive during Jim Crow. I'm the first person in my family to go to an integrated school. Let that sink in. This wasn't that long ago. There was no healing because there was no repair. Then there was redlining. Then there was the New Deal, which discriminated against Black people and Indigenous people. Then there's the housing racism. So there have been multiple things that have happened, since slavery. It's not just about slavery, Coleman. So that's my question. And I asked that question because this Z Squirrel account on Twitter is on it. I think it's important to understand where Coleman comes from. Because like I said, and I think the Oracle said it, but why is his voice being amplified? You're about to see why. So Z Squirrel actually did a little bit of digging, and I think people need to see this. Coleman Hughes worked for the Manhattan Institute, a Zionist propaganda mill founded by Reagan's CIA director until very recently when he finally got his cherished CNN gig, and now also writes for Barry Weiss Rag, also funded by Zionist billionaires. But he says he's independent. So I will add this to give Coleman the benefit of the doubt. At the time when he got the job at the Manhattan Institute, he probably did not know those things about the Manhattan Institute. Maybe he didn't know who the founder was. This happens all the time. People don't dig that far deep. Maybe he didn't know. But it could explain why his voice is being amplified. Look at this. So Jules actually took a screenshot of this here. There's no evidence that I've been co-opted by anyone. I have an independent podcast. I work for CNN as an analyst. I write for the Free Press. I'm independent in all these endeavors, and no one is paying me to say what I'm saying. Well, people don't necessarily have to pay you to say what you're saying, but when you are saying certain things, there are certain people that will amplify you. And I'm getting really tired of people saying that because they have an independent podcast that there's no issue here that they work at CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. And if we're going to be fair, if you were one to criticize Sam Cedar when he worked at MSNBC, you should be holding that same criticism towards Coleman Hughes working at CNN. If we are going to be fair, it's mainstream media, and mainstream media doesn't amplify, and they don't hire people, all right, that are on the outside, that are not a part of the status quo. Here's the picture here from the Manhattan Institute. So that's what Z Squirrel was referring to there. And it does say it right here. The Manhattan Institute was founded by former CIA Director William J. Casey in 1978. So again, Z Squirrel was correct about that. Keep in mind, this is the same account that actually discovered that the New York Times journalist that wrote about the sexual assault claims on October 7th, that person wasn't actually a journalist. This was the account that uncovered all of that stuff. They go on to say, unsurprisingly, given that Coleman Hughes got all his funding from Zionist billionaires who made him a millionaire and gave him his media spotlight and CNN gig. After October 7th, he went on podcasts like Joe Rogan to launder genocidal Zionist propaganda for his AIPAC paymasters. And if you see the screenshot here, it says Coleman Hughes to Joe Rogan. I saw this interview, by the way. Hamas is a death cult. Israel is the good guy and Hamas is the evil guy. So Coleman Hughes repeating Zionist propaganda. And if you can see, it doesn't let me zoom in on a picture, but if you can see here, the people who are actually commenting here, it says, stand with us. That's a Zionist account. This one here, Armoro Singart, that's also a Zionist account. KK Brunetta, Zionist. Madam Split. You see this? So we always got to ask ourselves, why are these people being elevated in mainstream media? Z Squirrel goes on to say Coleman Hughes particularly loves identity politics as he brands himself as anti-woke, following the lead of other Zionists like his boss, Barry Weiss. Having gleefully sold his black skin to his Zionist paymasters, he uses it to launder their genocidal propaganda. So let's just keep it real. We all know Barry Weiss is a Zionist. Barry Weiss isn't going to hire someone like Coleman Hughes if he's pro-Palestine. See how they use black faces to, I told you this was happening. And there's a screenshot of the article here. Coleman Hughes, the struggle for black freedom has nothing to do with Israel. This is him. This is him. Let's go on here. They go on to say, oh, so you don't believe Israel is not an apartheid regime. Here's the black guy, Coleman Hughes, we bought telling you it isn't. Listen to him. He's black. Meanwhile, here is the head of Israel's own Tessalem Human Rights Organization saying Israel is an apartheid regime. That is exactly what they do. They find someone who is black that is going to parrot that same narrative. So then you really got to believe what they say because it's a black person saying it. It's not an Israeli saying it. It's not a white person saying it. This is important, people. I'm trying to show you how they work. There's nothing Zionists love more than buying black people and other minorities to mouth and launder their genocidal Zionist propaganda for them so they can hide behind them and say, see, they're saying it too. Richie Torres, Chloe Valdery, Bakari Sellers, and Coleman Hughes. You see what they do, guys? They got Richie Torres. They got Chloe Valdery. See this? They got, that's Chloe too. They got Bakari Sellers. So you see how they do this? I told you. Goes on here to say, it's astonishing how easily Z Squirrel called him scum. I wouldn't go that far. Coleman Hughes' pure fabrications of right-wing Zionist media class and the billionaires that fund it brand themselves as independent, anti-IDPOL free speech lovers when they are Zionist maniacs. Look at him tap dancing for his masters. And he goes on, it's a screenshot here. I can personally say that I consciously worked less hard in high school because I knew my blackness would give me a big boost come admission time. I doubt I was peculiar in that respect. Please respond to incentives. I can't vouch for the other stories. So he said he worked less hard, but he got into Columbia University. So here it is here. It gets more insane. For Barry Weiss Zionist propaganda rag, Coleman Hughes wrote a piece denying George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. This was on tape, went to court, but Barry says, no, not enough evidence for me. He's innocent. Believe Israeli women. So you see how, and they are parroting the same talking points. So again, she's not going to hire someone to work at her outlet that's not parroting the same talking points that she's going to parrot. She sure as hell wasn't going to hire someone that's like free Palestine or anything like that. So, and then they go into more details about how crazy and wild Barry Weiss is. So this piece here from Indy Left from Indy News Network. Corporate funded independent media has been creeping up for a while now. People need to be super wary and understand the business dealings of the people they listen to so they understand the financial motives, if any, behind their rhetoric. Thank you so much for saying that, Indy Left. Thank you for saying that, because there's a number of people, all of a sudden, all these people popping up that we're independent. And I'm like, dude, you work at CNN. We're independent. I'm like, you're on mainstream media, right? So Iraq said this: the fact that he's getting defensive about it means he knows people are onto him. It's exactly what you wrote. Zionists are hiring brown people to do the talking for them because they know the public would never accept anything they say. They've been caught lying too many times for this to be undone at this point. It really is an information war. So do I think that Coleman Hughes believes what he's saying? I actually do. I think he does believe what he's saying. And I told you about the way that he grew up, and I told you about the way that Sonny grew up. So they do have a difference there in reference to, you know, their backgrounds and stuff like that. And I can tell you from my experience as someone who I've lived in all three of those types of areas. When I grew up in a diverse area, yeah, I used to think that too. I used to think, you know, we're a colorblind society. Let's not focus on race. Let's not deal with those things. But once I stepped outside of that environment, I realized the rest of the world was not that way. The majority of the country is not Montclair, New Jersey. The majority of the country is not a military base that I started growing up on. So I had an eye-opening experience. But whether you agree with Sonny or Coleman, at the end of the day, what really matters is that you understand that both of them are status quo, and both of them are in the positions that they are in because they protect the status quo. They are not outside of that. Neither one of them is way to the left. Neither one of them is way to the right. Neither one of them are telling you to get rid of the billionaires. In fact, Coleman has tweeted before not to get rid of billionaires. And that's why they're on mainstream media. So always remember that. I know that was probably a long rant, probably longer than you expected, but I really needed to take the time to break that down. A number of videos that I saw earlier this morning, they were just all the Republican channels, conservative channels were saying he destroys Sonny. And I feel like some of the left channels were just like, she destroyed him. And I don't think there was really any destroying that actually happened in that conversation. I think that both of them brought up good points. I think that Sonny came in a little bit too hot. I think, Sonny, you might have had a little too much caffeine in the morning. I don't know, but you could have came in a little bit calmer. But I think they both brought up valid points. And sometimes it's not always about who destroyed who. But I also think it's important that you understand why these people are given the platform that they're given in the first place and where they're actually coming from. And so if I hear Coleman Hughes say that he's against reparations for ABBOTT, then I want to know if Coleman Hughes is against reparations for Holocaust victims and for the Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps as well. And I have a feeling he probably would not be against it, at least for the Holocaust victims. Otherwise, he wouldn't be working with Barry Weiss. These things are important. You guys need to know. You guys know where Sonny came from. I didn't talk about this before. Sonny, millionaire. These people make a lot of money. A lot of money. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. But in reference to the class and the race issue, class and race is intertwined. And I know some people just want to focus on class and they'll say, let's not talk about race. But if you're telling me don't talk about race, that means you don't want me to talk about me. Because part of who I am and part of what I have to deal with in my life is because of my race. Maybe one day this country could get to a colorblind society, but I don't see it happening anytime soon as long as you still have these structures that are in place right now. Let's go to the comments here. Thank you, Muhammad. Sabby, you got skills, honey, like critical data, news, and information analysis. 21st century skill sets. Yeah. Well, I noticed, I was wondering if people were going to bring more receipts when they discussed this today, because I noticed people were not talking about, there's a lot of other things that go into that conversation that happen at The View. You need to know where those people are coming from. The Oracle says, but why is his voice being amplified? Exactly. Thank you, Marcus. Slaves were also promised 40 acres and a mule. After Lincoln's death, it was Andrew Johnson who rescinded that promise. Confederates averaged 160 acres. Thank you so much for that, Marcus. Thank you, Lorez. There's Freedmen's Bank 2, ex-slaves lost everything. Thank you, Daniel. Mutual Aid Los Angeles. Cheap organic food and clothes, 2515 West 17th Street, Los Angeles, MacArthur Park. Thanks for that shout out there, Daniel. Thank you for the super sticker, Yantra. Thank you, Aspen Fallen. Never forget Barry Weiss marked Gaza Journal professor and poet Rafiat Ali Rear for death. His family too. That's right. I'm trying to tell y'all. I'm trying to tell you. His family too. She has blood on her hands. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your investigative journalism. Don't thank me. Thank Z Squirrel. Thank Z Squirrel. Thank you, Bernie. Awesome takedown, Sabby. I'm not really trying to take them down. I just think there's more to that conversation that you guys needed to know. I think you need to know these things. And thank you, DC. CNN equals AT&T / MSNBC equals Comcast. ABC News, US equals Disney. There you go. Let me get the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin. Printing money without taking it from the tax pool was how you get hyperinflation. MMT is extremely destructive economic policy. I 100% support reparations, but you have to be honest and understand how surplus and deficits work. Okay, those reparations that were just implemented by Kathy Hochul, I don't think they're thinking about that. Okay, that's no reason for us to struggle. That's no reason for reparations to not be paid for ADOS. Sorry, but it is what it is. Thank you, Roger. New York ballot, Sabby only 2. That's tomorrow, or excuse me, not tomorrow, Sunday. William says Coleman Hughes getting that conservative anti-black think tank money. Just like you guys remember the guy that used to come on Breaking Points with Sagar? Marshall, is he still there? Remember, he came from a think tank too. Thank you for the super sticker, Jack. Deneen said neither one can speak for ADOS. Septian, thank you. Let's be honest, Sonny is paid to be tone deaf. Sonny is paid a lot of money. We're talking millions. Thank you, Derek. Stop looping Black Americans that are descendants of slaves with other groups. Other groups did not endure chattel slavery in this country. You're correct, Derek. Thank you, Lisa. Hughes is from Quileut, a right-wing rag. Quileut? Hughes is from Quileut, a right-wing rag. He argued against reparations in Congress. He's not the guy. That's right. That's right. These are the people that they promote, though. I'm trying to tell you, they elevate these people. Thank you. They live, we sleep. Land back tomorrow. Look for your local demo. Love you, Sabby. Thank you. Love you too. Thank you, Septian. Sabby, why did you remind me of my North Carolina upbringing? I am so sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you, Marcus. Defending Palestinians is pro-Semitic. Arabic is a Semitic language, unlike the made-up Yiddish version of Hebrew used by Israelis today. Actually, when I looked at the definition of Semite, it also included Hebrew there as well. It's just FYI. But yeah, you're right. I've said this before. Palestinians are Semites. And thank you, Roger. Workers' issues like working for 200 years with no pay. That's right. That's right. That it is a labor issue. Labor issue. All right. All right. I think we're good, guys. I think it's time to head out. I will be live on Sunday. I know it's Easter Sunday, but I don't have Easter plans this year. So I'll be live at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Don't miss that. Lots to discuss still. And what is this, Michael? Hillary Clinton is against reparations for FBA or so for a foundational Black America. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nobody's against. Notice none of them are against reparations for, survivors of the Holocaust, though. None of them were against reparations for Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps. So these are the kind of things that we need to pay attention to. All right, guys, that is it for me. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.